So I will be speaking based on the project Determinants of Inclusive Integration Context that was done in cooperation with Bergen University. And I will very briefly, I will not stop on the theoretical parts to go to the results which relate to the topic of today's discussion, and then to move as fast as possible to our discussion. So this theoretical framework is based on acculturation theory by John Berry, united with the theory of field theoretical approach by Pierre Bourdieu and a number of others. So, and in focus here, what we really, some of kind of like the basic premises where we come from is that if we research integration, we do not look at integration as integration attitudes as some mental phenomena which are set in people's mind and which are cemented and unchangeable. But we look at it as the social phenomena which is created through connection or interaction with other groups. So, and which is also flexible in time, and also to look at the relational approach to acculturation research. So we look at culture not as a solid set of meaning, customs, and a language, etc., but as a political phenomena, which is by nature political and which is defined through the culture, through the essence of the group, to whom the culture is belonging, also through contact with other cultures. So the identity is also here relational. It's a common of cultural variables which are operationalized through language or religion, and which is also changeable in time, depending on how the circumstance changes, how the distance between different cultural groups changes, if there is conflict between groups or if they exist in harmony with each other. And acculturation process or integration process is therefore it's a process of negotiating these different cultures, for example, of the ethnic or native culture for a person, the culture of the society where this person is working, or the cultures of different groups, and changing the borders, making these borders between groups less solid, also changing the attitude. The concept of asymmetric acculturation field refers to the understanding that in the same society, different groups might be in a different position. While one group is in position of power, a majority group as a rule, so in that situation, acculturation requires not only change of their mental attitudes, but also adjustment of the structures that would be helping for the integrating group or for another group in the integration process. I will not be speaking about somebody integrating somewhere, but two groups integrating to assist their adaptation. So in this situation, acculturation for different groups in different status have also different meaning and different content. So in the project that I am referring to, what we did is we looked at this integration field, what is everything that surrounds and influences this process. And the approach that we did, we identified a number of potentially conflicting and potentially complicated processes or narratives or stories or issues or questions which make it or either easier or difficult for the society to integrate, the society which has a number of different cultures. Through a number of tests, we identified these topics. So it is the history and the background of USSR, or Soviet Union, the impact, how people from Estonian background, from cultural minority background, perceive what it was. And the question of occupation of Estonia, how it is perceived by different groups, education, labor market situation, minority representation. So this is just a whole number of things. I will touch only this one, the question of cultural diversity in the song and dance festival, which we also used as a part of a very large questionnaire. And so to refer very briefly that for those of you who are not especially from here, the ethnic Estonian identity by different research, the important central points that have been identified is the values, Estonianness and Estonian statehood, the fact that Estonia built up to achieve independence, and it's very good for me to refer to that after Ege's presentation. Some certain political orientation is a part of that, and also a part of social history. Well, this is not so important in this presentation because that was identified for the historical discussion. And also a number of studies have shown that the national identity or like state identity is very strongly linked with ethnic identity for Estonian nation state, which is characteristic and which creates a number of challenges for integration process. In some projects, some research, there have been identified a model for Estonian open identity, meaning what could be the identity that would be inclusive for the minorities, and the characteristic elements were the multicultural attitudes and values, pride for achievements of Estonia and the people from Estonia, and love for Estonian nature and acceptance of multiple history interpretation. Russian-speaking inhabitants, people living in here, well, majority of them are Russians. So in this particular study, for example, we had to leave out people from different nationalities than Russians because they were not possible to analyze them statistically. But it was interesting that we could identify approximately 1/4 of the sample. Here is the numbers, who themselves choose to identify themselves as Estonian Russians. So we are speaking of double bicultural identity. And in a later data that refers to singing and dance, song and dance festival as well, we'll deal with that. To understand also the framework, among the questions that I mentioned, this potential conflict, we ask how important people feel that this topic is for the society and how personally involved they are. So the smaller the number, the more important it felt for Estonian, for Russian and Russian-speaking groups. So in here we have also separately the Russians and the Estonian Russians. So you see that for Estonian group, the most relevant topics and most heartfelt topics among all of those was the cultural diversity of Estonian Song and Dance Festival, which is a very strong cornerstone of Estonian identity. So what Agnese mentioned, it functions for here as well. And also the occupation question. I will not refer to that. While, for example, for the Russian-speaking respondents, the most important was a question of possibilities of the labor market and social economic standing. Although we see the Song and Dance Festival was also rather important.
So, Marianna, yeah. A brief question, just to be sure. The scale is what, from 1 to 5?
1 to 4.
1 to 4?
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah, and 1 is the 1 to 4, yeah, the strongest. So, how did we ask this? So what were the questions? So you understand what is behind those numbers. So this was a kind of I have to say that these numbers that follow, they do not represent kind of the generally existing attitudes, because this is a kind of manipulation. We tell people to take a position in situation where you have to choose either one or the other. Because in usual, you don't ask, in usual situation, when you discuss about, for example, Song and Dance Festival, you don't force a person to take position. So here we force them to take a position, either support or strongly or rather support the position that Song Festival should remain the vessel for Estonian cultural tradition and only Estonian songs should be performed. And B, Song Festival should express Estonian cultural diversity and also Russian-speaking songs should be added to the program. So here we are referring to the Russian-speaking in this question. And these are the results. Blue are the positions of Estonians, and it is quite typical and has been supported also by other studies that they are rather protective for Song and Dance Festival, and it is very natural because this kind of change is perceived more as a change referring to ethnic identity, the ethnic roots, the hard-won, hard-deserved independence and statehood. While the Russian speakers, so the greens are bicultural, and the red are those who perceive themselves just as Russian. They're rather mixed, so they're not so categoric. The minority actually are categorical about the B statement, and they're cluster around the middle, but you still feel that they're a bit more to the B side. And there was a number of supporting questions, and so the scale was from 1 to 4. We practically do not have the 4 represented here. In this, so the rather lack of very categorical replies. And it's interesting that while in these kind of questions, the positions of two groups are rather diametrical. So Estonians tend to very strongly disagree with the Russian speakers rather agree that presenting Russian-speaking songs could become important symbol, signifying that Russian speakers have, it didn't fit, but that they are included in the society and that they are welcome in the society. And here it's kind of like more pressuring question that there are large minority that they should be included. Because they're 1/3 of Estonian society, and so they should be included. And so this kind of question are conflictual, but at the same time, for example, there's a possibility for solution. These responses here are not so different, and like, for example, statistically, if 90% of Estonians were objecting against Russian-speaking songs, then around 40%, these are numbers are not here in my mind, actually supported the idea that a tradition of multicultural song celebration that would not impede on the existing Estonian song. So it was not substitute, but in addition to a Estonian Song and Dance Festival, that this could take place. So almost half of Estonian respondents would agree. And you see here how interested in the topic are you personally, how important it is. The groups are rather close. And Estonians feel quite strongly that if the Song and Dance Festival becomes multilingual, that this will endanger Estonian language and culture. So in some other studies, also I recommend you to listen to our colleagues speaking in other rooms about the cultural threat, the feeling of cultural threat, or the feeling of the small culture that might not have its kind of cornerstone that helps to preserve it and to keep it together. this is the feeling that is behind this. So it's just maybe I don't stop here because I don't think we have much time. And I will show the last slide about the... See kukkus välja. Okay, ta kukkus siia. So it is correlations between the strength of national and ethnic identity. These are the collective scales. So this was a feeling of belonging to the community, to the society, and this was feeling of pride and positive feelings about your own ethnic group. And so for Estonian, there was very strong negative correlation between that's interesting. Okay, the main focus here is that for Russian-speaking group, there is a strong connection between readiness and between the statement of that singing and dancing festival should be the vessel of only Estonian culture, and their feeling of belonging to the Estonian society and Estonian community. We explain it or we analyze it from a sense of view that while for Estonians the Song and Dance Festival is primarily the cornerstone of the ethnic identity, and since it's very much linked to the state identity, then it continues there. Then for Russian speakers or for those who identify themselves as Russian, it is primarily the symbol of national belonging and national identification, and that's rather why they would like to belong, and if they do not belong, they feel left out, and it creates them, excluded. And in a way, what all of this discussion, what it exemplifies is that, first of all, Estonians and Russians are not a homogeneous group that is just one. The positions are very different in all scales. And the strength of ethnic and national identity is strongly linked with being included or excluded with in also nation-level cultural events such as state and Song and Dance Festival. And culture has a very strong role for inclusion and for inclusion or exclusion on symbolic level. And Song and Dance Festival is one of major symbolic events and identity building events for people. And also awareness about this is crucial in order to also avoid leaving these issues for being abused for political purposes, for example, or just for media purposes or public discourse.